Welcome to the Raising Arrows podcast, where we discuss all things large family home and homeschool. Hello, friends. I'm Amy Roberts from RaisingArrows.net, and this is episode number 139, Discussion-Based Education. Now, this might be a bit of a new concept to you, but you might realize as I talk about this, that actually you've been doing this all along. You just didn't really have a name for it. And I'm sure there are other names for it. This is just the name that I give it and the way that I think about it. I have written about this in the past. I have a post that talks about being a conversational mama, somebody who strikes up conversations with her kids and engages them in in-depth conversation. So you could think about this as a conversation-based education or educational conversations, or you could think of this also as upper-level college type education. And that is really where I got the idea for educating my children this way. As I progressed in my college education, I have a degree in English, and when we got to the 300 level courses, the courses changed from, the gen ed where you are lectured from the textbook and you take a test, and that's your whole grade, to actual sitting in circles and conversing about the material that we were reading. We were going over ideas. We were talking about politics and genres of literature and characters, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. Think of it as a book club where you sit around and you talk about the book. And so when it came to educating my own children, this was the paradigm I wanted to follow. I wanted to bring back those college years where we sat around and we discussed meaty topics and had conversations where it wasn't just always me lecturing or it wasn't a dry textbook. I wanted to give them something they could sink their teeth into, and I wanted to encourage them to ask questions and to make hypotheses from what they had listened to and learned and read, and then to flesh out those thoughts and communicate those thoughts to each other. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what an education is for. It is to communicate ideas and knowledge and wisdom. And so our children need to be able to do that. And as I said in the last podcast, tests don't teach. Tests do not actually measure how much your child knows and how much they have retained. And instead, this discussion-based paradigm is actually a better way of figuring out how much they understand and whether or not they're retaining the concepts and topics that you're talking about during the school day. I'm going to start off this podcast by explaining to you what I've done over the years and then telling you a story about how even I have adjusted and changed and grown in this model and thought outside the box recently with some of the schoolwork that we are currently doing, where I thought I had a really good grasp on this discussion-based education and realized I could grow more and challenge myself more and do more with it. And so we have changed some things about our homeschool in the past few weeks that have actually turned out to be really good changes. So when I became a parent for the first time, I was in college. And so I was in the middle of those college years with the discussion sitting around in a circle in my English classes. And so because of that, it kind of jump-started me into the whole idea of having these conversations with my little one. And as he grew, I just naturally went into having these conversations with him, even though they were sometimes much bigger than his little brain could handle. We would talk about them. We would go ahead and use big words and talk about big concepts. I would often read to him from the books that I was reading, even though they were well beyond his years and capacity for understanding. But I'm somebody who loves words. I love the way they taste in my mouth and feel on the paper. And so I enjoyed being able to share that with him. And sure enough, as he got older, he was a very conversational kid. He loved to read. He loved to talk. And as he has grown up, he's now 25 years old, and he loves the written word. He loves the sound of words. He's got a huge vocabulary, and he has enjoyed words immensely. But he also loves to debate massive ideas and issues. And it is quite interesting to see how he has grown from that little kid that I was reading Dostoevsky to this kid who's not a kid anymore, who wants to debate the finer points of theology. Now, obviously, not every child is going to be that conversational and that verbal, but I do believe that that's the kind of education that most people thrive under. Think about the times when you have learned something profound. Was it from a textbook? No, it was probably either from a book that was not a textbook, or it was from a conversation that you had with somebody, or it was from listening to something or watching something. It most likely wasn't from a dry textbook that was just facts and figures being thrown at you. It was more of a conversation. It was something that interested you and brought you to a place of understanding that you hadn't had before. And then you wanted to go and talk about that. You wanted to mull it over. You wanted to research more. And that's what I want for my children. And so when I share information with them throughout the school day, I actually bring in stories that apply to that. For instance, if it's something that has to do with World War II, I can add in the fact that my dad was a World War II vet, and here's what he did. And I can share that their own father is a veteran, and here's what he did in this particular part of the country. I can share stories that I grew up with. I can share information that I have learned, all these little bits and pieces of information that otherwise would maybe not have been shared with them simply because I'm having a conversation instead of having them read something in order to get their information. Discussion-based education also gives you the opportunity to stop and answer questions that your children might have. And that's actually a good thing. Some parents get a little irritated when their kids interrupt them. And you can teach your children better ways to interrupt you, better ways to ask their questions or to get your attention than to just interrupt. But it is very good for us to stop what we're doing and reply and answer and converse about certain things that they have questions about right then and there. Today we were talking about Ronald Reagan, and one of the kids asked, well, what was this DARE program that started during the 80s? What does that stand for? Well, I could have been like, well, we'll wait till after school to talk about that. But instead, I had my computer right there. I Googled it really quick. It took 2 seconds and I had the answer for them. And we could keep going, but the conversation was there and they learned that information that they maybe wouldn't have learned otherwise. It also teaches our children to dig for themselves. If I'm not there to facilitate the conversation, they've seen me do it time and time again. Google it, ask somebody. They aren't afraid to step out and ask questions because it's been encouraged all throughout their years of schooling that you get to ask questions and I will do my best to find them. But if I'm not there, you can also try to figure out how to find them. So it actually teaches them to enjoy the process of gathering information and finding the resources that they need to answer their questions. Now, there were definitely years in there where workbooks were my friend, and I didn't have a lot of energy to converse. In fact, when I'm dealing with morning sickness, I don't even have the ability to talk much because when I'm nauseous, it seems to push on my diaphragm, and I tend to just not feel well enough to even speak above about a whisper. So I don't have a lot of conversations when I'm in the middle of morning sickness. So during those times, I did rely on workbooks and textbooks to get us through, but those are short periods of time. I mean, they didn't seem short when I was in the middle of it. And I've told people before, when I add up all my years of morning sickness, it's 4 years total. Between all of the kids. But I did have, these snippets of time where I did have to rely on other resources to do the teaching for me. But as soon as I could, I wanted to jump right back in there. And for several years, the main conversations that we were having revolved around Bible, our read aloud, which usually came from our history lessons. I would choose something that had to do with that time period in history. And then we were usually having a couple of times a week a discussion that had to do with history and or geography. So that was how the early years have been. And then I sort of progressed into more of a robust morning time where we were actually sitting together as a family for a good hour to an hour and a half doing history, geography, fine arts, music, some art at times, our Bible, our read aloud. And I got into a very good rhythm and routine with that morning time. And we were doing a lot of conversing and discussing and digging in deep to the information that I was sharing. Now, a lot of people wonder, what curriculum was I using? For the most part, I was using Tapestry of Grace. However, when we started this more robust morning time, I was actually using actual morning time lessons from the Homeschool Garden. And then on top of that, I was using the Peaceful Press. So that was what eased me into this more robust morning time. And I would highly suggest you do something like morning time lesson plans that are actually pre-done for you. There are a lot of companies out there that do it, and they have everything you need. It's a bit of a Charlotte Mason type thing. So you look for Charlotte Mason morning time plans or something along those lines when you go to search for these, because it will actually help you ease into a morning time before you try to find other curricula within your homeschool plans that fit into that morning time. So that was how I started. I actually had been doing a very simplistic morning time for many years where I did Bible and a read aloud, and that was it. However, when I moved to the Peaceful Press and the Homeschool Garden, they had more subjects integrated into the morning time lessons. And so I just followed those and learned how to do it with actual plans. And then when we were done with those programs, I brought Tapestry of Grace back in, and I found a way to make it fit into our morning time perfectly. And I got very, very comfortable with making that part of our morning time and all of us learning together from the history, geography, and the fine arts and government and all of that that goes into Tapestry of Grace. By the way, if you were to get on the Tapestry of Grace website, I'm afraid you would be awfully overwhelmed by it. So I'll just tell you briefly what I use from Tapestry of Grace. I use the integrated plan. So basically, it's the entire thing. And that is what I prefer to do, is just buy the integrated. I know it's a hunk of money, but you do it 4 times and you've got plans for your kids for the rest of their school years. And that is what I have used over and over and over again. I've always gone back to it. We do take a Jubilee year at the end of each 4-year cycle where we do something completely different. And I've talked about that previously as well. But I always come back to Tapestry of Grace and I use the integrated program. So if you're looking at the website, it's the integrated curriculum and I use it year by year. There's 4 years and I have all 4 years. And that way I have everything I want to pick and choose from, the different ages, the different subjects. And it is very user friendly when you do it that way. I really don't think I would be able to use it pieced out the way that they have some of the subjects and units and such. And that's really because I have a large family and I want to have that smorgasbord to choose from. If you just want one grade, one subject, go ahead and do that. But I have found that the integrated plan is really what has worked for our family. And by the way, I will have all these links and information in the show notes for you so that you can just easily go to the different resources that I'm mentioning during this podcast. All right. So like I told you, I got very comfortable with doing Tapestry of Grace and all that involved in our morning time. I was just going along thinking everything was great and perfect and everybody was having a good time and we were enjoying the discussions and it was wonderful. And then I got thrown a curveball. Now, this curveball is not something I have talked super publicly about. My email readers got a heads up a couple weeks ago. But my 17-year-old just recently married his 16-year-old girlfriend. She is having a baby here in a couple of months, and they live with us. And he is still continuing to do school because that's something he needs to finish up. We're trying to work on moving that along a little bit faster and figuring out what we need to do there to make sure he gets all his credits. He also needs a driver's license. There's a lot of parts and pieces to all of this. And obviously, there's a lot of emotion attached to this as well that we have really had to work through. Through the grace of God, it is turning out better than we expected. It actually has just been a very beautiful experience. Although the refining fire at times is hot, we can definitely see the blessings from it. And so when we got that news, obviously there were a lot of things we had to start thinking through. And as time went on, I realized that he was not super interested in finishing out his high school years. He wasn't super interested in getting his high school diploma. He really couldn't see a reason for it. And his dad and I were a wee bit devastated by that fact because we value education. We value all of these different subjects. They have been an important part of our homeschooling years. And so for us to have a kid who's like, I don't really care, was a little bit like, oh, you hit me where I live because I have been trying so hard to make this a fantastic experience for you. And here you just want to walk away from it all at the very end when you barely have anything left to do. So after I had kind of gotten over the fact that he wanted to quit, I started mulling it over and I decided to have a little bit deeper of a conversation with him because, again, that's what we do. We have conversations. We don't shy away from the hard stuff. So I sat down with him and I said, tell me a little bit more about why you're feeling like you want to quit. And he said, well, I love morning time. He said, I love the discussions that we have about geography and history. And he said, it's just so interesting. You make it so interesting, Mom. He said, but all the other stuff, I don't want to do it. So all the other stuff was a foreign language and math and science. And then his literature that goes along with Tapestry of Grace. The literature selections are based on the history. So I was like, well, let's dig a little bit deeper. I said, do you not like the foreign language? He's like, no, I understand that. And he goes, and I'm almost done with that. I said, well, how about the math? Oh, no, I understand why I need the math. Okay, the literature? No, I enjoy the literature. Okay, so all that's left is science. And he's like, yeah, I don't like science. I don't even understand why I need this. He's like, it's not interesting. I don't get it. And I had noticed that we had tried so many different ways to put science into his homeschool lessons and his plan for the day that we just kept trying different books. We kept trying different ways of doing it. We tried audio. We tried the textbook. We continued to try things and they were not working. Not at all the way that they had with the other children. And I've known for quite some time that he has a little bit of a learning disability. It's not major. I'm not even really sure what it is. It does run in the family. My husband has an uncle who also has perhaps some dysgraphia or something along those lines. So we've never had it officially diagnosed. We've just tried to work with it. And that's what I've done with all my children. If they've had any sort of learning blocks, we just try to figure it out. And I wish that I had dug deeper with him back a year ago when he was having some of these issues, because we could have headed this off and not have gone through several different iterations of science before landing on what we decided to do. So as I was talking to him about this, I said, let me mull this over. I said, but I know a lot of other families who integrate science into their morning time. You already said that you like morning time. What if we added science into the morning time and you didn't have to do the textbook anymore? And he's like, yeah, I think I would like that. Interestingly enough, as soon as I got done talking to him, I actually sat down and watched a video from a series that Sally Clarkson recently did. And she was talking in there about real world education and how she and her husband had been sitting in their apartment with a lot of different people from different walks of life, and they were having conversations about things that Sally said just opened up a whole new world to her. And she realized that was how she wanted to educate her children. And I was like, oh, this was my aha moment. This was my epiphany that I needed to change how I was homeschooling once again. I needed to adjust my thinking, and I needed to step outside the science box that I had been standing in and do something different. I had also been talking to the father of a friend of mine who just happened to be a doctor. And he was telling me about his education and some of the time that he spent in Russia. And it was very, very interesting because he was sharing with me that he really feels strongly about the science that kids get in school being something that actually interests them. So that was another aha moment for me. Perhaps I was trying to feed my son a science that was not all that interesting to him, when really what he needed was a science that made sense to him and he was fascinated by, and he might dig deeper into it. And so, because we already had a lot of background in astronomy, we have met several astronauts, we have memberships to museums that are more air and space type museums. And so I thought, you know what? I'll just grab the Apologia Astronomy book and we will read from that. And I will have my younger kids join in and I will read from it and we will talk about it, and it will be enough. That will round out an astronomy credit for him. And then he only has one other science credit he needs to get, and I'll figure that out when I get there, and we'll add that into our morning time. And so that is what I did. About 3 weeks ago, I started this, and within 2 days, he was like, oh, this is really interesting. Oh, I'm really enjoying this. This makes a lot of sense. You make it so interesting, Mom. And it was such an encouragement to me that I was headed in the right direction with this. So the moral of this story is, don't be afraid to change things, even if you get into a good rhythm. If you see a child who's struggling, or you see where you could do something different or better, don't be afraid to try to integrate that into whatever it is you're doing and change things just a little bit, tweak things just a little bit, and you may be surprised by the results and how much fruit it actually bears. So real quick, let me share with you just a few things that you could do to make your homeschooling more of a discussion-based education. And I do have a podcast where I talk about workbooks and textbooks not being the evil that some people like to make them out to be. So if you feel like you need workbooks and textbooks, please check out that podcast and know that I am not condemning in any way workbooks and textbooks. I just feel like discussions need to be had, even if that is what the bulk of your homeschooling is. Make sure that you're conversing with your kids, you're talking about deep concepts, you're having big conversations with them. And even if it's just current events that you're talking about, that's one way that you can bring this discussion into your homeschool, is to talk about current events in a non-threatening, non-scary kind of way. I know right now it seems like there's a lot of big stuff that goes on, but try your best to keep it less threatening and put it in the light of scripture and make it a biblical conversation that you're having. Obviously, you can do Bible all together with your kids, and there's always read alouds. You can add in the science. Like I said, Apologia's elementary books are very good for that purpose. You can even do math all together. You could choose books that talk about multiplication and teach everybody all together those multiplication concepts. You could use Life of Fred math books and do those with almost everyone, because they are written in a way that's engaging and interesting. And so you could do that together. You could find storybooks at the library that talk about different mathematical concepts and add that into your homeschool. History is one of those things that is very easy to do all together. You can choose from a multitude of either living books where you use them as a read aloud, or actual curricula. There's things like Mystery of History, Biblioplan, Tapestry of Grace, like we use Story of the World, and the list goes on and on. There are so many different wonderful history curricula out there that you could use those different books, especially if they're particularly engaging and you enjoy them. Your children are going to enjoy listening to you read aloud from them, and then you can stop periodically and ask your kids questions or talk about something a little bit deeper. One thing that we do is, as I'm reading, I will pull up pictures on my computer. My laptop is sitting right there while I teach school, and I'll pull up pictures of the president that we're talking about, or the event that we're talking about, or the artwork that we're talking about, because with so many kids sitting around the table, it's a little bit difficult for them to see the pictures. And even if we were sitting in the living room on the couch, there's still just not enough places for them to sit right around me where they can see them. And so I will pull it up on the computer and turn my computer around so that everybody can see it while I continue to read. And that just helps them to solidify in their mind who these people are, what these events really looked like, and what this artwork looks like, and make some judgment calls for themselves about, do they like it? What do they see in the picture? What do they see in the artwork? What do they think about the people? And we just talk about it. We converse about it. It's a discussion-based education. Geography is another thing that has been great to do all together. We are a nation that simply does not know where anything else is on the map except our own state and maybe a few other places. We are not very good at geography as a nation, and that was something I really wanted to rectify with my own children. I wanted to show them where the other countries of the world were and where they were in relation to each other. And so we have really had a big focus on geography that has gone along with our history plans. There are lots of great fine arts programs out there. Music in Our Homeschool is one that I think of where it's very interactive. She's got videos and she's got links to things. And so you can really have this robust fine arts education with your kids. I'd also encourage you to get Sally Clarkson's book. Actually, I think Clay Clarkson, her husband, wrote the book, Educating the Wholehearted Child. It goes through the way that they did education. And while not everything was doable for me, it was a great place to start getting some ideas going. And actually anything by Sally Clarkson is pretty phenomenal. So I definitely check out Educating the Wholehearted Child and then look at some of her other books. She just came out with a book recently called A Waking Wonder, and I am just getting ready to read it. I'm pretty excited about it because I think it will also really touch on this discussion-based model of education and just help me to do even better with it. And I think you and your children will find that this discussion-based type of education actually creates an environment where you enjoy homeschooling, your children enjoy homeschooling, and they learn lifelong lessons. I can't wait to hear how you implement this type of education. Please drop me a line at amy@raisingarrows.net if you have any questions or just want to share what your homeschool day is like. I love hearing from my listeners. And we'll see you next time on the Raising Arrows podcast.